Good morning and welcome to today's Climate Action for Associations digital breakfast. Joining us for breakfast today, just so you know, Nick, your camera's turned off, back, great. Joining us for breakfast today are three very different industry bodies, membership organisations representing three very different sectors. Today we've got Andrew Goodacre. Andrew is the CEO of the British Independent Retailers Association. Welcome, Andrew. We've got Keith Warren, who's the Chief Executive Officer of the Food Service Equipment Association, and Ian Riley, who's the CEO of the World Cement Organization. Joining us again is our friends from Thinking the Unthinkable, who are our co-hosts, Chris Langdon and Nick Gowan.
Morning, hello.
Guys. Welcome, everyone. Just to recap, the purpose of our digital breakfast as part of Climate Action for Associations is to help membership organisations learn and share with one another, to inspire one another to take change and to accelerate, obviously, climate action and climate neutrality. We are recording the meeting this morning with a view that we will be sharing with Climate Action for Associations members and our wider community, who are predominantly membership organisations as well. So they will find our conversation hopefully really interesting and insightful, and will hopefully prompt action and change on from their perspective as well. So, but Ian, we wanted to start because last night, we were talking through today's event, and we decided that your association is probably representing the biggest emitter that we've actually had on one of our breakfasts to date. Do you think that's a fair statement?
I think it's almost certainly true. The steel industry is the only competitor we've got, if I can put it that way, and they're probably slightly less than the cement sector. So unless you want to lump oil and gas together as being responsible for the transport sector, then that's probably going to be true. But cement is responsible about 7 to 8% of global CO2 emissions.
Ali, shall Chris and I just introduce ourselves?
Yes, please.
And where would you like to get to by 1 minute to 9 o'clock?
For 1 minute to 9 o'clock, I'd quite like to get to a point where we've actually identified if there are any commonalities between you as associations in terms of what you're trying to achieve in relation to supporting the memberships that you represent. If there are any opportunities amongst you to collaborate. And as I outlined, the purpose of today is really to inform and inspire others. So I think we're in a good place. This is a really good place to start.
I'm Nick Gowing, and I created this project, which you can see over my shoulder, of Thinking the Unthinkable, long before COVID, long before the climate emergency 7 years ago, when people thought that life was still pretty stable. But I identified that, and I brought in Chris to join me from Wilton Park. Chris.
Well, actually, I joined from the Oxford Research Group, where, again, we've been looking at radical change. So Nick and I have been doing interviews with, I can't tell you the number of leaders. I can tell you the number of transcripts because I've analysed them with our data researcher who's been working with us. We've got about 5,000 pages. So over the last 5-6 years, we've been asking leaders how they see the world. And even from the get-go in 2015, they had a sense of the uncertainty, though I think nobody expected quite what happened last year. So we've been working to try and help leaders understand, manage, and thrive in times of radical uncertainty.
And that's what we'd like to be partly with Ali and CAFA to try and help stimulate this morning. This is the third of these breakfasts. The other two have been fantastic, but do see this in the interest of commonalities, of a conversation. Please jump in on each other, agree or disagree. We want to find common ground, so don't worry about protocol and so on. Just jump in and say I agree or I disagree. But maybe just what we could do first of all is just underline from each of you, understand from each of you where you think you are on sustainability and so on, because we've got some of your documentation here.
But-
But I just wonder, Ian, can I come to you first?
But also introduce yourselves. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah.
it's great to have Keith, Ian, and Andrew with us. So please do, first of all, introduce yourselves.
Ian, why don't you just introduce yourself, particularly the Whitewater connection?
Yeah, my name's Ian Riley. As Alison nearly got right, I'm CEO of the World Cement Association, not organization. There is an organization, but that's a different thing altogether. So we represent the cement industry globally. The association also has other stakeholders, so suppliers and particularly technology providers. My background is industrial minerals and then cement. So I was about 15 years in the cement industry in China with Holcim.
In Wuhan.
Sorry?
In Wuhan.
In Wuhan, a lot of the time, indeed. In Wuhan, a lot of the time, yeah, with Huaxin Cement, and then after the merger in Beijing. So I came back to the UK in 2019. So I've been here for a couple of years. So 1 year of COVID and 1 year without. I think I preferred the first one on balance. And as you say, Nick, I have a second hat, which is the Whitewater hat. So I work 2 days a week for the World Cement Association, and the rest of the time I spend with Whitewater, which is a consulting group. It's a group of former CEOs and senior executives who really help company CEOs to realize their vision. So we're plumbers, if you like, rather than architects, in terms of helping CEOs to translate that vision into something that the whole organization is actually following. It's really a golden period for that. I noticed your introduction there and helping leaders deal with uncertainty. I mean, if you look at the situation today, there's a huge amount of opportunity for change and for positive change. Of course, some people are going to get left behind. But if you think about the adoption of technology over the last 10 years, over the last year, is 10 years of technology adoption over a year.
That's exactly what we say.
Yeah, you look at the sustainability pressures, climate change, which we'll get onto in a second. This is starting to create real change. And then you've got localization of supply chains. You've got the impact of the geopolitical tensions. I mean, we could go on,
And very quickly, with what you're doing with Whitewater, are you seeing pickup now from leaders? Do they realize the enormity of what's coming? And we should talk about it as a climate emergency.
Yeah, so I think you can say that in virtually every sector, the best performing quintile, quartile, whatever you'd like to say, the best performing companies are pulling away from the others. And one of the things that is characterizing them is that they see the opportunities that are created in this new environment.
And what about those who don't move that quickly? What about those who are reluctant, dragging their feet?
I think they're in big trouble.
Are there a lot of them still?
Yeah. Oh, yes, absolutely. Yeah. I think it's still a minority that see the opportunities. Yeah. I mean, for that matter, in the UK, Brexit as well. Of course, Brexit will create opportunities as well as problems.
Because that I think is at the heart of what we're trying to do with these breakfasts and with CAFA, with Ali. Sure, those who are dragging their feet, who are dragging their anchor chains, really wake up to the enormity. It ain't going to go away. It's going to be even bigger probably than COVID. Can we just pause for a moment?
Yes,
Ian?
please. Let's introduce
Keith and Andrew.
Keith, is a very warm welcome to you.
Thank you, and good morning, everybody, and delighted to take part. As the Food Service Equipment Association, we represent the manufacturers of commercial food service equipment that you'd see in hotels, restaurants, pubs, hospitals, schools, etc. The big pieces of stainless steel that tend to be behind the counter. Certainly, in terms of our journey, and we have 195 members. And they're all either providing equipment or acting as kitchen design houses or providing service facilities to the industry. A feature of our sector is it's hugely fragmented. If you just think of the number of opportunities in different sites to buy a cup of coffee or a meal out of home, that demonstrates amply the diversity of the nearly 300,000 outlets that there are. There are then in turn about 1,200 dealers or resellers of equipment in the market, and then probably about 300 companies providing the equipment. So fragmentation is a key challenge. Our journey as the association is that there's a huge inertia that's got to be overcome to get everybody to the same point. There aren't any key players that necessarily can move the whole of the market. Everybody's got to move together, because in a commercial kitchen, it's not unlikely there'd be 30 different brands of product in there. So that's really the challenge we face. We've been very engaged on the climate change journey as a trade association. I've been with the organisation for about 20 years now, but I remember the early days in the 2000s when we were chairing our European Federation's technical committee, sitting in Brussels with the Commission talking about eco-design and energy labelling for professional refrigeration in our sector. This is the energy label that we see on domestic equipment. We're trying to move that into the business-to-business sector. That started in 2002. We finally got that legislation in 2016. So, and now there is only that product in a commercial kitchen that has an energy label on it. And therefore, there's not a holistic approach that the operators can take to saying, I want to put in an A+ kitchen. They can't do it at the moment. So there's a lot of manufacturer claims around this. And yes, we've led the work. There's a global group, which is all of us as the international associations. We wrote a white paper in 2010 on climate change and circular economy principles to say what the industry wanted. But it's difficult getting traction because who's going to make the first move and at what cost? So behind all of that, we've set up a net zero carbon group. Yes, we're working very closely with government to liaise in terms of getting products on the energy technology list. We're tracking very hard what's going on in Europe, but I think there's a frustration all around in terms of being able to get the whole of the industry to the same point to really make a significant difference. And I have to say, internally within the organisation, we've done very little other than what has been organically to look at our carbon footprint and what we do. And now's the time for us to address that. And we've realised that, and we're coming to that point in terms of what we do as an organisation to be more efficient in terms of the environment.
Keith, just looking at something from the FEA, you make it quite clear you face a potential for a slowing of progress on energy reduction if swift action is not taken. And you're talking very specifically about the need for government incentives to actually create new momentum, and particularly because of the effect that the COVID has had on liquidity and so on. In other words, there's a slowing, even if there is ambition in some minds.
And in hospitality, there's a backlog of debt, as Andrew mentioned earlier. And so the industry is going to have to get up and trading first before it can start marching forward and investing across its breadth. Now, there are areas that are investing, because operators that see the benefits of more sustainable equipment, which tends to bring other benefits as well, such as connectivity, and that can bring not only energy and utilities saving costs, but also some operational costs in terms of labour. And we've seen the advent of dark kitchens. We've seen certainly the development of delivery.
What's a dark kitchen?
A dark kitchen is effectively there are different versions, but and essentially it's a unit on an industrial estate, perhaps with 3 or 4 different kitchens in it that all can provide food. So you don't have that need for a site in the high street with the branding that goes with it. So you would phone through using a delivery app to order a meal, and it could come from a dark kitchen, or it could come from the same brand on the high street. You won't ever know, and the meal will be to the same quality, consistency. But the dark kitchen means it is just a set of equipment with an industrial unit on an industrial estate. And you could have 4 different brands within the same kitchen.
Quick one more question before we go to Andrew and just check out his overarching perspective. Let me put to you that the documents that I've seen are talking about net zero by 2050. But ultimately, the urgency is far greater than that.
Yes.
It's about 5, 6, 7 years.
Yeah.
Is that really accepted in your business?
It is. Our mantra is we're 3 kitchens away from net zero carbon 2050, because the average life of a kitchen is 10 years. So a lot's got to happen very quickly. And actually, there's got to be one change really within the next 5 years to get us on that journey. And what you're citing there, Nick, is from our net zero carbon plan, which is the integrated approach to supporting the whole of the supply chain, from the point of manufacture to the point of specification of that equipment, a margin for the reseller, and then an incentive for the operator, which we've seen come through in the super deduction. It's a fantastic initiative. We lobbied very hard for the super deduction. It's come through. But at the end of that, what there's also got to be is a proactive recycling scheme to take less efficient equipment out of the market and get new, more energy efficient equipment on the market. And I guess if we were to have one soft criticism, it's the fact that the objective of the super deduction is not simply to get more energy efficient equipment into the market, but that integrated supply chain, as you can see, there are gaps there that make it very easy for that supply chain to fall down. If a reseller of equipment comes under pressure from the end user operator, they will value engineer the product, and it's often and it's often the case then that the less efficient equipment will get thrown out because it tends to have a higher price, and less efficient equipment will be specified. So that's why we feel an integrated plan for our sector is critical to our success in bringing about that 3 churns of a kitchen by 2050 and with more energy efficient equipment.
And what's your energy mix?
Sorry, and I didn't hear that.
What's your energy mix between electricity or gas and so
on? It's changing more towards electricity. We're probably at about 2/3 electricity to 1/3 gas. Okay. But we're very engaged on the hydrogen project, and we have members developing equipment to run off hydrogen, because of the decarbonisation, decentralisation, and digitalisation of the energy supply networks. We'll need to follow that through as well.
Right.
And just a quick question, just one sentence answer, Keith. Does your business get it? In other words, because Ian, a lot of businesses are still nowhere near even getting the basics.
My business is a trade association, or my industry that I'm representing.
Your industry.
Okay. They half get it. They half get it.
And Andrew, a very warm welcome. You have a very mixed membership base, independent retailers. Yeah. Do introduce yourself and tell us, do you get a sense your membership gets it?
Yeah, okay. So as Ali said, I'm CEO for British Independent Retailers Association. That's 4,000 independent retailers who are members, about 8,000 shops between them. And then there's lots of sort of guest members who register interest in us, and we communicate with them. So we've got quite a wide network throughout the UK, and a broad range of membership, as you say. We go from a small pet shop to an independent department store, so small, large, and everywhere in between. Does the membership get it? I think they're slow adopters. We've got, as you'll find with any group of people, that there are a small number of early adopters, and those are the ones we've been working with recently, trying to understand how they've made this transition. And then we're looking to use that knowledge and knowledge from other sources to help educate the broader membership and retail in general, to help them move forward to a more of a net zero situation. We have a unique feature about us for an association, in that we run a buying group. So we have a buying group that allows our members to buy products from suppliers. So we have insight into the supply chain, and that's also going to be one of the areas of challenge for us, because obviously a retailer is the final person pre-consumer. So what we want to try to do as well is influence the supply chain, or at least part of that supply chain, if not all of it, that goes into our membership, and see if we can't get a better more environmentally friendly situation, building up to the products they're buying are more in line with that thing. So it's helping, it's making sure suppliers are doing their bit, it builds into the supply chain, meets the retailers, but the retailer is actively thinking zero carbon or not, if we can influence the supply chain, at least therefore their products will be along those lines as well. So it's early days for us, I'll be honest. It's something that I picked up on about 15 months ago in terms of actually meeting and discussing with environmentally friendly retailers. 2 or 3 retailers to begin with, but as we've explored, we've seen more and more people making that statement that they are environmentally friendly or ethically sourced or whatever descriptive they use. But basically they're moving in that direction. And what is clear, and I pick up on Ian's point here, that it's about an opportunity here. There is a movement from a consumer point of view that they want actually better sourced products. The consumer wants to do their bit, and one way a consumer can do their bit is buying products that are also more environmentally friendly. So this is a retail opportunity, I believe. I think it's and there's no doubt that the businesses are moving in that direction, are better set for recovery from this pandemic.
But Keith raised the point about
Picking up
about COVID and the debts. How big a problem is that for some of your, shall we say, slower adopters?
Yeah, it is a problem. I think debt is ultimately a burden that they have to live with at the moment, because for an independent retailer, their business model is not about borrowing lots of money to expand and pay it back on future earnings. They're very much living in the here and now, and running a business in a small market town or whatever it may be. And I think the pandemic has a wider issue in terms of a massive distraction, unfortunately, and I think they've been firefighting for so long, and then when you start talking to them about investment in areas that may not show an immediate return, then that doesn't instill great amount of enthusiasm always, I must admit. There's kind of a rolling of the eyes, even around my board of directors, which comes from the membership. I can see a rolling of the eyes when I talk about our desire to help members and for the association itself to become more environmentally friendly. But that's not to say that they don't recognise it. I think it's this, they've had so much to deal with in the last 12 months. Now, the fact that reopening and trade has been pretty good, and if they get a sense that they can stay open, more importantly, then we can get them aligned to, okay, a lot has changed. What we need to focus on, I think, is really making them realize that while you've been closed, a lot's changed, guys. A lot has changed. Consumer thoughts, consumer thinking, consumer habits has changed, and we need retail to respond to that. Whether you're selling hardware items, pet food, clothing, the whole range of what people buy in shops, the mindset of the consumer has changed, and we need not just environmentally speaking, but in terms of just their perspective on what they use shops for and why they use them.
And do they see sustainability as being a way to address those changes, Andrew?
Yeah, some do, Ian, and this is what really inspired me to get involved, because it's speaking to businesses that were ahead of this. They'd already made up, and it's part of that business owner's mindset as well. It's what they believe in, and the early adopters are they live and breathe it anyway. So. A small example is a toy shop in Sheffield, selling traditional toys, ethically sourced wooden toys or recycled children's clothing, and really doing a fantastic job, and really passionate. I've got a very clear vision, a very clear sense of what she's trying to achieve, and finding that the response to her vision, the response to the way she's presenting her business and what it stands for, has been really strong. And then I got talking to someone who does bottomless food. So it's people bringing containers in and filling their own containers in with food, and then she's opened a cafe next to it, and that's using sustainable products to develop that cafe. And again, her business has prospered and continues to prosper even through the pandemic, interestingly. And we've seen more and more examples of people realizing there's opportunity. But that's part, it's been most of it's driven by their own passion for this particular topic. I wouldn't call it an industry.
Just picking up
drive as such.
Andrew, just picking up on your. Sorry, there's a long delay on the line. I was just struck by your bio publication when you're asking basic questions. Sustainability, how green is your business? With a lot of pictures. Is it time you looked at the impact you are having on the environment? That suggests to me as an outsider that you're still in the early stages of having to convince and work on your membership.
Yeah, we are very much so. Don't get me wrong. I can talk passionately about the examples I know where people have shown that this is a sustainable business model as well as what it does for the environment. And there is still a battle there to win minds over, and it has become tougher because of the pandemic and the distraction, the impact on these businesses' survival rate, in fairness. So, but that's not to say that as I say, I think, funny enough, I actually think now is the time to really start pushing those messages harder. So we're involved with a couple of industry initiatives. One is linked to the government around net zero. It's called Net Zero, and that's about an educational resource driven support for small business in general. That will include retail as well, and there'll be specific retail support. So we are contributing and intending to use those tools to support our membership. And the other one is a more ambitious model or prototype. We were able to get it off the ground, and it's something called Green Street, where we want to create a high street that is really, everyone on it is committed to this vision, and that's a whole range of premises working towards creating this environmentally friendly street. Let's not just talk about individual shops, and that's a more ambitious project, but I think we might see that get off the ground this year as well, and that's also about sort of raising profile and awareness of what can be achieved within the retail sector.
Great.
Ali, would you like to come in, because we're halfway through the breakfast, even though there's no food. Where can CAFA help on this? Because Andrew's looking for help, Keith is looking for extra guidance. Ian, I think your business is at the other end of the scale when it comes to capacity and scale compared to the retail trade, but there's still that business of changing mindsets. Where can CAFA come in?
I'm quite interested to pick up on the point about, I can see, Andrew, how consumers, so your members, customers are driving, the demand for sustainable products and services. I guess I'm interested to pick up the procurement conversation before we sort of move on around how CAFA can help with Keith and Ian, really. So to what extent is procurement still being driven by price as opposed to sustainability, Keith and Ian, in your respective sectors, and what can be done about that?
We did a piece of work several years ago now called Mind the Gap, which we did a survey of manufacturers, of the dealers, the resellers, and also of consultants in the industry. Manufacturers are bringing more energy and utility efficient equipment to the market, but struggling to get traction with it. Most manufacturers recognize the need and have invested significantly in producing more energy efficient equipment. The consultants who specify a lot of the leading kitchens will put that into the specification because that's what their clients want to hear. They'll say, oh yes, we can design you a more efficient kitchen. The problem comes when that goes for tender, and the tender goes out, and then the operator says, well, I haven't got £100,000 to spend on that kitchen, I've only got 80,000. And it's the challenge of the reseller network to hold that supply chain together and hold all that knowledge and information the manufacturer has about the long-term efficiency, because the average life of a piece of commercial kitchen equipment is between 8 and 15 years. It's robust, it's there for the long haul. And that's where it will get value engineered out. And that's the challenge we face. So it's holding that supply chain together is one of the principal challenges, because the equipment is out there. And if there was greater take up of it, manufacturers would do more to invest in it. I think just to finish the point off, what was interesting in the point I mentioned earlier about professional refrigeration and eco-design and energy labeling there, that was complemented with a MEP scheme, minimum energy performance scheme, which took the lower performing 25% of equipment off the market. So unless a piece of equipment reaches that threshold, it can't be placed on the European, at that time on the European market and now the UK market. And I think this is where government needs to look globally at what it's doing to lift the game for everybody through legislation and regulation, because relying on a voluntary pull through of being able to demonstrate lifetime savings of equipment and so on is too remote from an operator who, when they start out in the morning, have the staff turned up, have the supplies turned up, how many bookings have I got? The equipment they buy and its energy efficiency is fair way down the agenda until the point at which it breaks down or they need a new kitchen. Then they'll think about that in more detail. Operationally, there's very little they can do to change the existing kitchen they've got and improve its energy efficiency. They can train the staff and make efficiencies that way. So this is why we need that legislative support to be an enabler for change within our industry.
Ian.
Yeah, so if we think about the equipment side, so I should clarify something, Nick, just so that you didn't misunderstand something I said earlier. Within the cement industry, I think 80%, 90% of companies understand the sustainability issues and the greenhouse gas issues. My comment was really about what portion of companies have leaders who've understood they need to transform in order to take advantage of the new business environment. Yeah.
I was thinking more of whitewater rather than cement.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
When I asked that question.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah. So in the cement industry, if you're buying equipment, if you're buying a new cement plant, then virtually everybody is going to buy high efficiency equipment, because although the capital cost will be slightly higher, you're very quickly going to get a payback on reduced energy consumption. So there probably are the odd exception in remote places where they perhaps don't have enough foreign currency or something like this, but 95% would be that way. And of course, part of that is driven by the fact that in the last 10 or 20 years, 2/3 of the new cement plants have been in China. And in China, they've had regulations that have, a bit like you were saying, Keith, it's the same sort of thing that, you have to retire the backward capacity and you must use high energy efficiency equipment in order to meet the new energy standards. And, when these energy standards were brought in, there was no penalty for not meeting them. And then after a few years, there was a small penalty. And today, if you don't meet them, you can't run the plant. So, that's how it's progressed. But if you look at...
Are you talking about just China or globally?
Just
Are you
China.
talking about China or globally, Ian?
China, Nick,
Okay.
just China. The global situation is, if they applied that globally, Nick, we wouldn't have any cement plants in Europe or America. They're all, well, that's not quite fair, but almost, I guess, 80 or 90% of capacity in Europe and America is quite old, and therefore obviously not the latest energy efficiency. But if we talk about procuring consumables, and particularly fuel, which is by far the largest purchase that the cement industry makes, then that's done very much on the basis of cost. So you can see, in Kazakhstan they use gas, but pretty much everywhere else they use coal. So coal or petcoke as the main fuel. Alternative fuels are used, but again, it's on a cost basis. You can save money by burning old tires, plastics, waste oil, a whole range of different fuels. But it's always with the view to cost, because the fuel cost is such a large portion of the total. If you get away from fuel, then an increasing number of companies do have sort of ESG type of evaluation on the procurement system. So they're looking at sustainability in various forms. But I think cost is still very much the key driver. So you might.
I was very struck, and forgive me, there's a very long delay on the line at the moment. forgive me, I was very struck, and it comes from 2018 from the World Cement Association, but again, as a driver for all three of you, the warning back in 2018, none of which was new, we could soon face more aggressive moves from investors, regulators, and other stakeholders. In other words, has that reality sunk in as not just something which will be delayed for another day, but something which is confronting your business head on and has made a difference to performance and also to behavior?
Yes, I would say actually that that predates my arrival at WCA, but it was quite prophetic, because I think we can trace that to probably about 2019 in the cement industry. So investors in oil and gas, of course, had started talking to the oil and gas companies long before that. But we started to have those kind of conversations from late 2019 onwards. So investors were saying, what are you doing about your carbon footprint? And today there are quite a lot of investment funds that have targets, for example, to reduce the carbon intensity of their portfolios by a certain amount, typically 4% a year. And they're saying to cement companies, we don't believe you can do that, and so we're going to divest. So from the finance side and the investment side, that's definitely a pressure today. In terms of wider stakeholders, I think that's been going on for longer. And the industry saw 20 years ago that at some point it was going to get more pressure on this. And so we've been working on reducing the CO2 footprint since at least 2000, the year 2000. But the urgency of doing that and going further, I think, is really changed in the last year. And of course, importantly, changed since Xi Jinping made his announcement on 2060 net zero carbon for the Chinese economy as a whole, because that immediately changed the attitude of the Chinese producers, who make up 57% of the total global capacity.
2060 is still a heck of a long way ahead compared to the reality. Ali, we've got 20 minutes to run.
Interestingly, on that, Nick, they don't believe they have till 2060. So the Chinese producers think, A, they will have to be earlier than that, 2045 or whatever. B, they have to have solid progress in the near term, so maybe 2030. And C, that they will be expected, each company will be expected to get to net zero.
Okay, Ali, we've got 20 minutes to run. Lay down that challenge.
The challenge, I guess, I'd like to hear from all of you is to what do you see the key role in climate action for associations in relation to your respective associations, and what can we do to help, and what's missing? Is there anything missing in terms of supporting and engaging your memberships? And what can we do to help?
And what do you need?
Top three ideas?
I think for me, it's winning those hearts and minds of the individual stakeholders and our individual members. And I think interestingly, I made Nick's point about investors divesting from companies that aren't moving this direction. An independent retailer's main stakeholders are the consumers, and I think there is evidence of consumers actively thinking about where they're purchasing, what they're purchasing, and how they're doing it. And I think we need to proactively help our members understand what they can do to go, because I think most of the time for a retailer, they're at the end of the supply line. They feel sometimes a bit powerless in terms of what they can do. Yes, they can do things within their shop, and we've seen that happen in terms of introducing low energy light bulbs or whatever the case may be, making their shops more efficient. But they often feel powerless because it's the products available in the supply chain, and the limited availability or maybe the cost of buying sustainable products and their ability to sell it onto the consumers. So I think we've got to win over hearts and minds, and I think we've got to win over the supply chain so that is also working towards ensuring that retailing is a sustainable exercise and a sustainable business in this country.
Can I just make a point there, Andrew? Because coincidentally, our local Londis has been refashioned for in the last month, and literally opened a few days ago. And I went round it thinking there are many things missing from here which could have been more attractive. And I'm very struck by what you said about the bottomless food provision. In other words, you turn up with your own plastic box, and also things like freezers and fridges, about whether there's a price attraction for doing something which is more sustainable.
I think there is. I think it is an absolute business opportunity from a retail point of view if you get your proposition correct. I think it's winning over hearts and minds of the size of the opportunity and how quickly they can realize it. I think all too often we make short-term easy decisions, and I think it's it's finding a balance with a business that hasn't got massive resources, either financially or people-wise, but they want, and I feel as if it wouldn't take much to convince them that it's a positive change, but it's convincing them to be brave enough to make that change. I think they can see the benefit. It's getting them to make that vital step. What we will do.
And
is
are those who
the
lease the
examples.
equipment?
Yeah. Well,
are those who lease the equipment? Are they waking up as well?
Yeah, but this is what I'm saying about the supply chain. I think some are. Yes, I think there's evidence in the supply chains that we are seeing. As Keith will say, if you're supplying hospitality supplies, if you're supplying grocery shops and they're using freezers, then when they look to replace those fridges and freezers, or when the business refits its shop out, they should certainly look at bringing in the best possible equipment, the most environmentally friendly, the most efficient equipment coming in there. It doesn't always happen. I'm surprised Londis haven't done that. It depends on their business model, but for the independent retailer, I've got no links with them, but for the independent retailer, it will come down to what is affordable and what is available. But it's only ever thought of when that equipment has run its life. And I echo Keith's point there that it only ever gets changed when either the whole shop's going to be refit, or, as I say, that particular piece of equipment needs replacement. But those supply chains are improving, and we're seeing. I mean, even in one of the biggest emitters in retailing is clothing. So the manufacture of clothing is a massive contributor to the environmental problem. And we're seeing changes there happen. But one of the biggest changes that we need to facilitate in terms of clothing is the recycling of clothing, because there's an awful lot of wasted clothing that gets just thrown away, and all that could be put back into the system and reused, either as products themselves or recycled and brought back out. But we don't have a really good industry view of how to address that problem. And use
old
clothing more effectively and more efficiently.
Yeah,
we need a CAFA for customers.
Yeah, I mean, some of the major department stores and major retailers, they're obviously capitalizing on the brand equity, as well as obviously realities around recycling, upcycling, even exchange. I think Selfridges have an exchange program, a borrow and rental scheme, etc. now.
Yeah,
so
we're seeing a lot more, and within retail, that the large companies will lead the way to an extent, because they can. I think what you see at our level with the smaller businesses is entrepreneurial flair, really, and individual passion leading the way. And that's what we've seen, I suppose. And what we want to be able to do is share those best practice examples with our wider membership. The best way of convincing a retailer this is a good thing to do is to show someone who succeeded doing it, to be honest. And so the more we can highlight those examples in all those various sectors, the better we'll be at winning over those hearts and minds. But it is a challenge. I don't think it's impossible at all. I wouldn't be sat here talking to you about it. I think it will take a while. It'll take a time. It will take some really radical thinking on our side in terms of the way we communicate the messages and the way we engage people around it. And yet I'm really hopeful and pretty confident that retail across the whole spectrum will respond positively to this, and see the
Yeah, there is
benefits
an
for doing so.
urgency. Andrew.
Yeah.
Yeah, there is an urgency, a real urgency.
Yeah, there is. The problem for the retail sector, I think, is that they don't see themselves as massive contributors individually, and so they can challenge their supply chain and say, we don't want to see plastic packaging coming through, we don't want to see the use of plastic within stores, so all those aspects can change and make that. But in some ways, most of our products we sell in many shops are imported from the East, and so you've got the carbon footprint of importation. Our own local manufacturing is not that strong in that respect. So that's why a lot of retailers, I'm not saying they don't care, they absolutely do care, but I think the challenge we have is that they don't see themselves making it, what they do doesn't make a huge amount of difference within, as they see it from their perspective, unless they.
That's a central problem to the whole COP process.
Yeah,
people individually doing anyway. But we're looking for the CAFA link. We've got 15 minutes to run. Keith and Ian, please come in.
Yeah,
this has been fascinating.
I think
down to the economics of even a pot of liquid. Keith.
I think that the CAFA solution, and certainly impressed with the toolkit of what we can use as a trade association. That's great. What's the CAFA toolkit for the supply chain that helps each of the constituent parts move? Because in our sector, our members are selling equipment to everybody from McDonald's, the world's biggest food service operator, to the high street cafe run by a single man or woman. Now, in covering the breadth there, if you are a large national operator, you can see the benefits of investing for your corporate social responsibility strategy, for employees' well-being, to reduce costs. You can take that whole approach because you can drive it from the top down as a chief executive to say, we're going to go sustainable and see it through. You can make it endemic within the organization to bring about the change that you desire. And there's certainly help that's needed there to help develop that. But where there's a supply chain, I think that's what's come out of this meeting this morning. It's getting each to realize its own responsibilities and take account of those responsibilities and do something. None of us can change the whole world. We can only change that we're in control of. So if you're a reseller of equipment, what do you do that's different, where you're squeezed between a manufacturer, the commerciality of a manufacturer and an operator? You're providing a middle ground. What do you do to hold on to sustainability in your strand of the market and what you're doing? And then if you're the operator, how do you hold on to that, recognizing that you've got equipment? Do you keep it going for as long as possible, 15 years? Well, if you do, after 5 years, there'll be a more efficient piece of equipment coming onto the market. So what becomes sustainable? Am I better off keeping on what I got because I'm not producing more steel in a factory somewhere else to buy new equipment and repair it? Or do I throw it out and buy new equipment? These are the challenges that
That's a shame.
I think we've lost Keith. I was going to ask Keith and also Ian a question, if I might. We've heard a lot in the past about Scope 3. There's a slight difference, I sense now, that people are now talking about real action. How relevant, Ian and Keith, when he can return, is this discussion about Scope 3?
Well,
which is the supply chains.
Yeah. For us, the biggest challenge is Scope 1. Mm-hmm. So with Scope 1, we're covering 90% of our emissions, and Scope 1 plus 2 is almost the whole lot. So within cement, we don't talk much about the supply chain because it has the feeling that you're dodging the question, because that's clearly not where the key issue is. When you move downstream, though, and you start looking at concrete, then it becomes a slightly different balance. So with concrete, then the supply chain starts to be obviously a very relevant consideration. So I think it's for many companies it is an issue, but within the cement industry, it's really not where the key issue is.
Thanks, Ian. While you were away, Keith, I just asked whether this talk of scope 3 in terms of supply chain, given what you were saying about supply chains. Is that now a real issue, or is it still just a talking point?
I think it's a talking point because I think many businesses have got to really fully understand what scope 1 and scope 2 is before we get to scope 3.
Are they even at the first base on this, Keith? I mean, if I went into one of your kitchens and said scope 1, scope 2, scope 3, would they look at it as a dish?
Yes, they probably would. I think everybody's at different stages for different reasons, and the key driver, of course, is the commerciality of the industry, isn't it? You're only going to sell what somebody wants to buy, and the twin poles of fear and greed that drive business. It's how that gets managed in the context of a sustainability agenda, because manufacturers will sell what their markets want, and if those markets want a more standard product that isn't as energy efficient, then that's what they'll keep producing. It's the same way we could go out today and buy an A grade dishwasher, which would probably cost us £700, or a D grade domestic dishwasher, which would cost us £250, £300, and you make a judgment on that. It's how we transition the whole of the market to take that less efficient equipment out. And I don't think necessarily straight commercial drivers will do that. I think there's a twin approach of there needs to be the legislative underpinning, as Ian mentioned, we've seen work globally in his industry, together with more informed decision making, because some operators in our field will only want a piece of equipment for 3 years. So they're not necessarily going to spend the money on a piece of equipment that may last 10 years. And therefore, that's the way it will run. We also have the issue of repairability of product. A major part of the future is that product should become repairable, and that prolongs the life of that equipment. Where's the tipping point between prolonging the life of equipment and throwing it out and buying new, more efficient equipment? That are sort of metrics that industry needs to be able to make value judgments, so that it's not just an emotional judgment, it's a tangible business case based around facts. But it can become the case there are so many variables in all that no decisions are made. It's how we eliminate some of those variables and give I think scientific fact to the messaging.
Throwing out, Ian, Keith, you used the phrase throwing out. Of course, what about the obligation to recycle as well? In other words, changing the mindset quite considerably as part of an overarching process, community, society's thinking.
But I think for an operator who's got a piece of equipment, they would see it as discarding it, because they won't understand the intricacies of what happens to that redundant piece of equipment at the end of his life.
Yep.
And yes, it will be recycled to the nth degree, high level of high volume of high grade materials in that product, and 75% of all new virgin stainless steel that comes into the market, 75% of stainless steel that comes into the market is from recycler. Only 25% is new materials. So that's already there and taking place. But does the operator understand that when he is, as I say, throwing out that piece of equipment? I don't think he is necessarily. So it's how you build that confidence, and you need a metric for it to say if that material gets separated out, recast into new materials, where are the benefits in that? What gives us the reason to bring about that transition? And that's why it's proactive recycling. I think we have to remove from the idea of scrappage to proactive recycling. But where is the point of proactive recycling hit for that product? Because it does depend on what you buy next to replace it. Because you could throw out a very efficient piece of equipment and replace it with something that's actually less efficient. So therefore, your lifetime costings in terms of its operation could be greater than what you've just removed.
Keith, we've only got 5 minutes left. Ali, do you want to issue another challenge at all? Because the mindset change. Now we need to hear again from Andrew and Ian, but quickly, is there one more big challenge you want to put on the agenda in the next 4 minutes?
Sorry, you broke up there a little bit, Nick, for me.
He's asking you whether you have any challenges you'd like to share in the remaining 3 minutes, 50 seconds.
Yeah, I guess just from a really high level perspective, what's the biggest opportunity that you can embrace to support the industry that you represent? Where do you see, where's the light, the end of this tunnel, very short tunnel, because
Ian, light.
So
light and cement.
The cement industry, as with perhaps most heavy industries, it is not so good at looking outside the industry for solutions. And so one of the roles of the association is to try to connect the cement manufacturers with what's happening in other areas in terms of technology development that's relevant, particularly for decarbonization.
That's amazing.
Fantastic. And so quickly,
looking outside, that's what CAFA is about.
Exactly. And in to do that, are you convening? How are you connecting those?
So there's the field that is relevant to us is CCUS, and so CCS is relatively developed, if you like, and technologically proven, but it's extremely expensive. So I think, and one of the key issues with CCS is it requires a great deal of upfront investment. And CCU is very interesting because a lot of heavy building materials are already calcium carbonate. So they already have a huge amount of embedded CO2. But there's the potential for that to be a very large sink for CO2. So CO2 usage in building materials is a very interesting field. And this is probably one of the key opportunities for companies in the building material industry to solve their own problems and potentially other people's problems too.
Carbon capture. Ian, thank you. Andrew, last word if you can, because we're right up to time. One big idea from you. I mean, the scale difference is so big between your retailers and the cement business, but I can feel commonalities and commonality in language and perspectives here. If you're still with us, I think you've frozen, but if you've got something you can contribute. Okay, you're there. I can see and hear you now. One big idea before Ali closes the show.
Right. The big idea is I think there'll be a change in perspective on the way people retail, driven by consumer demand. I mean, consumers are the light you asked earlier for me is consumers want to see a change, and that will drive demand and what people and the way their products are then delivered. The big idea, I think, is immediate recycling within the sector. So instead of buying new equipment, hire it. You know, you don't need to buy new equipment for one DIY job, for instance. You know, we have an awful lot of hardware shops, and you know, I think we need to get that reusable and less of the throwaway or just sort of one-off purchase that would just allow people then to spend the money they save there in other different ways.
Thanks.
Keith?
I think it's a framework for development, and I think it's about thinking about the big ideas, a way of the in-use phase of using products is related to energy. Should the power generators be also leasing us the equipment, because they could bring about the complete change? They've got the control over the whole of the supply chain as the energy supplier. So they lease us the equipment, we don't buy it as a capital cost, and then they build in the obsolescence by taking that off the market as and when new, more efficient equipment comes through. That's got to be a goal, because that will cover every sector and every business within every sector. And it's that whole holistic top-end approach that is a way to providing some of the solutions to this, I feel.
Thank you. Ali?
Fantastic. Thank you so much, everyone. What I've really taken away from this is obviously real commonality and pressure around supply chain and procurement. We work and have worked very closely with the Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply Chain in the past, and I'm definitely going to be sending them the link to this conversation and encouraging them to hopefully take part in one of CAFA's digital breakfasts that are in plan. So thank you so much. I hope you've all found it useful, and hopefully you'll all stay connected and stay connected to climate action for associations as well. Thank you, Keith, for the big up and around our action plan. And Ian, I'm really sorry. I do know that you are the association. I don't know why I said organisation. It's here in my notes. Apologies. But thank you, and thank you, Nick and Chris, once again for hosting. Fantastic.
It's been a pleasure. So thank you to all.
It's been a pleasure, real pleasure, and it's really inspiring, I must say. I can see common ground between all three of you, even though you're remarkably different industries and sectors.
Absolutely.
Thanks anyway.
100%.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, and maybe we can be in touch, Andrew, Keith.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye.